The clock on the wall showed 3:15 a.m., and Jake wiped down the same counter for the third time that hour. Working nights at Pete's Diner wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept him busy. The desert highway outside was empty except for the occasional truck driver passing through this small Nevada town. Jake had gotten used to the quiet. After spending years in the army, the peace actually felt good. No shouting, no chaos, just the soft hum of the coffee machine in the distance. Sound of wind across the desert. Most nights, he'd see maybe 5 customers total. Truckers getting coffee, late shift workers grabbing a quick meal, or the occasional lost tourist trying to figure out where they were. But tonight felt different somehow. The air seemed thicker, like before a storm, even though the sky was perfectly clear. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He'd learned to trust his instincts during his military days, and right now, those instincts were telling him to pay attention. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the bell above the door chimed softly. Jake looked up from his cleaning and froze. A woman walked in, but she wasn't like anyone he'd ever seen before. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, with skin so pale it almost seemed to glow under the diner's harsh fluorescent lights. Her hair was silver white, not the gray of an old person, but actually silver, like moonlight on water. What really caught his attention were her clothes. They looked normal enough: dark jeans, a black leather jacket, simple white shirt underneath. But they fit her perfectly, like they were made just for her body. And they looked new, not worn or faded like most people's clothes after a long drive through the desert. She moved with an odd grace, almost like she was floating instead of walking. Her steps made no sound on the old linoleum floor. Jake found himself holding his breath as she slid into the corner booth, the one that faced both the front door and the kitchen. It was the seat someone would choose if they wanted to see everything that was happening. "Just coffee, please," she said when Jake approached with a menu. Her voice was soft but clear, with an accent he couldn't identify. It wasn't quite European, not Asian, not from anywhere he could recognize. The words sounded careful, like she was thinking about each one before saying it. "Sure thing," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Cream and sugar. Black is fine." She smiled, and Jake noticed her teeth were perfectly straight and white. To perfect, almost. As Jake poured the coffee, he snuck glances at her. Her eyes were the strangest thing about her. They were large, larger than normal human eyes, and they seemed to change color in the light. One moment they looked gray, the next almost silver, then a pale blue. When she looked directly at him, Jake felt like she was seeing right through him, reading thoughts he didn't even know he was thinking. "Here you go," he said, setting the cup down carefully. As he did, her fingers brushed against his hand for just a second. The touch sent a weird tingling sensation up his arm, like a mild electric shock but warmer. Jake pulled his hand back quickly, surprised by the feeling. The woman noticed his reaction and tilted her head slightly, studying him with those unusual eyes. "You felt that too," she said. It wasn't a question. "Felt what?" Jake asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. The connection. She wrapped her long, pale fingers around the coffee cup. Most humans don't notice it. Jake wasn't sure how to respond to that. Most humans? What an odd way to put it. He decided to play it safe and just shrugged. "Static electricity. Probably. Gets pretty dry out here in the desert." She smiled again, but this time it seemed genuine, not just polite. "Yes, that must be it." For the next hour, the woman sat quietly in her booth, sipping her coffee slowly and watching everything around her. She seemed fascinated by the smallest things, the way the coffee pot bubbled, how the neon sign outside flickered occasionally, the sound Jake's shoes made when he walked across the floor. Sometimes she would pull out a small notebook and write something down, but she always put it away when Jake got close enough to see. Other customers came and went during that hour. A truck driver getting fuel and coffee. An elderly couple whose car had broken down waiting for a tow truck. A young guy who looked like he'd been driving all night and needed directions. The woman watched all of them carefully, like she was studying their behavior for some kind of test. What struck Jake as really strange was how the other customers reacted to her. The truck driver kept looking over at her booth nervously, fidgeting with his cup and leaving faster than usual. The elderly couple whispered to each other and kept glancing in her direction, the woman clutching her husband's arm tighter. The young guy actually changed his mind about sitting down and took his coffee to go, even though he'd originally wanted to rest for a while. But Jake didn't feel scared. Curious, yes. Confused, definitely. But not afraid. He'd faced real danger during his time overseas, and whatever this woman was, she didn't feel dangerous. Different, mysterious, maybe even impossible, but not threatening. Around 4:30 a.m., she finished her coffee and stood up to leave. She left exact change on the table, plus a $20 tip for a $3 cup of coffee. Jake had never seen her pull out a wallet or purse, but the money was there. Crisp bills that looked like they'd just come from the bank. "Thank you," she said as she passed the counter on her way out. "Will we see you again?" Jake asked, surprising himself with the question. She paused at the door and looked back at him. "Would you like to?" "Sure," he said, and meant it. "Coffee's always fresh around this time." "Then yes," she replied. "I think you will." After she left, Jake stood at the window watching her walk across the empty parking lot. Under the parking lot lights, her silver hair seemed to shimmer like it was made of actual metal. She didn't get into a car that he could see. One moment she was walking toward the edge of the lot, and the next moment she was just gone, like she'd vanished into the desert air. Jake rubbed his eyes and looked again. But the parking lot was empty. No car pulling away, no figure walking down the highway, nothing. Just the empty desert and the sound of wind whistling through the Joshua trees. He spent the rest of his shift thinking about her. The way she moved, the strange accent, those eyes that seemed too big into knowing. The way other people reacted to her with fear while he felt only curiosity. Most of all, he thought about what she'd said. Most humans don't notice it. Most humans, like she wasn't one herself. Jake shook his head and went back to wiping down counters. It had been a long night, and his imagination was probably just running wild. But deep down, he had a feeling that his quiet life in the desert was about to get a lot more interesting. 2 weeks passed before she came back. Jake had started to wonder if he'd dreamed the whole thing. Maybe working too many night shifts was getting to him. Maybe his mind was playing tricks after spending so many hours alone in the empty diner. But then, at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night, the bell chimed again. She looked exactly the same as before. Same silver hair that caught the light in impossible ways. Same pale skin that seemed to glow softly. Same perfect clothes that looked like they'd never been worn. This time, Jake was ready for those strange, large eyes that seemed to see everything. "Good evening, Jake," she said, sliding into the same corner booth. Jake nearly dropped the coffee pot. "How do you know my name?" She pointed to his name tag with a small smile. "It's written right there." Jake looked down at his chest and felt his face turn red. Of course. He'd been wearing the same name tag for months, right? "Coffee, black, please." This time when Jake brought her coffee, he was careful not to let their hands touch. But she noticed his caution and seemed amused by it. "You're avoiding contact," she observed. "Why?" That shock thing from last time was weird, Jake admitted, setting the cup down carefully. "Never felt anything like that before." "It wasn't a shock," she said quietly. "It was recognition." "Recognition of what?" She sipped her coffee slowly, like she was thinking about how to answer. "That you're different from the others who come here." Jake pulled out a chair and sat across from her. The diner was completely empty, and something about this woman made him want to know more. "Different how?" "Most people look at me and feel afraid, even if they don't know why. Their bodies react to something their minds can't understand. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense up ready to run or fight." She studied his face carefully. "But you don't do any of those things." Jake thought about it. She was right. Everyone else who'd come into the diner that first night had acted nervous around her. Even the tough-looking truck driver had seemed jumpy. "Should I be scared?" "That's what I'm trying to understand," she said. Fear is your species' most basic survival tool. When faced with something unknown, something that doesn't fit normal patterns, humans almost always choose fear first. My species? Jake caught the odd phrasing. You make it sound like you're not human. She went very still, like a deer that had suddenly noticed a hunter. What would you say if I told you I wasn't? Jake leaned back in his chair and really looked at her. The too pale skin, the silver hair that moved like liquid. Those eyes that were just a little too large and seemed to shift colors. The way she talked about humans like she was studying them from the outside. The perfect clothes. The way she seemed to appear and disappear without using a car. I'd probably ask where you're from. He said finally. Something changed in her expression. The careful, watching look softened into something that might have been relief. Most people would call me crazy, or dangerous, or both. Most people haven't seen the things I've seen, Jake replied, after 3 tours overseas. Very little surprises me anymore. Plus, you've been nothing but polite. You tip well, you don't cause trouble, and you seem genuinely interested in people, far as I'm concerned. That makes you good company, regardless of where you come from. She smiled then, and it was like watching the sun come up. You really mean that? Yeah, I do. Jake got up to refill her coffee. So, where are you from? Very far away, she said. Farther than you might think possible. Like another country? Like another world. Jake poured the coffee steadily, not spilling a drop. Okay? What's it like there? She stared at him for a long moment. You're not going to laugh or run away screaming. Or try to call someone. Who would I call? And why would I run? You're the most interesting conversation I've had in months. Jake sat back down. Besides, if you wanted to hurt me, you probably would have done it by now. We don't hurt people. She said quickly. That's not why we're here. There are others like me. Not many, but some. We've been coming to Earth for a long time. Just watching and learning. Trying to understand how humans work. How your societies function. What makes you make the choices you make. Jake nodded slowly. Like researchers studying animals in the wild. Something like that, yes? Though we don't think of humans as animals, you're far too complex for that. Too unpredictable. She paused. Too capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty, sometimes within the same person. Why study us at all? Because your species is at a turning point. The choices humans make in the next few decades will determine whether your civilization survives or destroys itself. And those choices will affect more than just Earth. How do you mean? She looked out the window at the dark desert. There are many worlds out there, Jake. Many different kinds of life. Earth isn't alone in the universe, but it might become alone. In this part of it, if humans can't find a way to stop fighting each other and start working together. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Not fear exactly, but the weight of what she was saying. And you're here to help. We're here to understand. Help has to come from within. We've learned that forced change never lasts. But if we can understand how humans think, maybe we can find better ways to guide the process without interfering directly. How long have you been doing this? I've been studying your species for about 50 of your years. Others have been at it much longer. Jake tried to process that. She looked like she was in her 20s, but if what she was saying was true, she was older than his parents. How long do your people live? Much longer than humans. We age differently, experience time differently. She finished her coffee and checked a small device. Jake hadn't noticed before. I should go. Dawn is coming, and I have observations to record. Will you come back? Would you like me to? Yeah, Jake said. I have about 1,000 more questions. She stood up, leaving her usual generous tip. Next time. Perhaps you can tell me about fear, about what makes humans afraid, and why you seem to be immune to it. I'm not immune to fear, Jake said. I just save it for things that are actually dangerous. She paused at the door. And you don't think I'm dangerous? Jake looked at her standing there in the doorway, silver hair catching the first hint of dawn light coming through the windows. Strange and otherworldly, yes, mysterious and impossible, definitely. But dangerous, no, he said. I think you're lonely. Her expression shifted to something Jake couldn't quite read. surprise, maybe, or sadness. Until next time, Jake. And then she was gone, leaving only the lingering smell of ozone in the air and a $20 tip on the table. Jake stood at the window watching the empty parking lot, wondering what he'd gotten himself into and looking forward to finding out. The third time she came, Jake was ready with questions. He'd spent every night shift for the past week thinking about their conversation, about other worlds and species studying Earth, like scientists watching lab rats, about the idea that humanity was at some kind of crossroads that could affect the entire universe. She arrived at 3:17 a.m. again. Like clockwork, Jake was starting to think that wasn't a coincidence, always the same time. He said as she sat down, "Is that significant, this time of night? Human brain activity is at its lowest. Most people are asleep, dreaming. The few who are awake are usually tired, less alert. It makes observation easier." She accepted her usual black coffee. Also, electromagnetic interference is minimal at this hour. Better for our equipment. She pulled out that small device Jake had noticed. Before, it looked like a smartphone, but the screen showed symbols he'd never seen. Shifting patterns of light that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Data collection, recording conversations, monitoring human behavioral responses, tracking social patterns. She put the device away. "Everything I learned goes back to the research team. So I'm being studied right now. We're both studying each other," she said. "I ask you about human nature. You ask me about my world. Fair exchange." Jake leaned forward. "Okay, fair enough. Tell me about your world. What's it like?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. "Very different from Earth. We don't have separate countries fighting each other. We don't pollute our environment or waste resources. We solved those problems long ago." "How?" "We learned to think as one species instead of many tribes. It took time, and it wasn't easy. We had wars too, once, terrible ones that almost destroyed us." She looked up at him. "That's why we study species like yours. We want to help others avoid the mistakes we made." "What kind of mistakes?" "The same ones humans are making now. Fighting over resources instead of sharing them, choosing short-term profit over long-term survival, letting fear and hatred divide us instead of working together." Her voice got sadder. "We almost didn't make it. Our planet was dying. Our people were scattered and fighting. We came very close to extinction. What changed? A generation arose that was tired of war. They chose cooperation over competition, understanding over fear. It saved us. But it took hundreds of years to rebuild." She sipped her coffee. "Earth doesn't have hundreds of years. Your climate is changing too fast. Your weapons are too powerful. Your population too large. You need to make the change faster than we did." Jake felt the weight of that responsibility. "And if we don't, then humanity joins the list of species that didn't make it, and the universe loses something valuable." She looked directly at him. "Every species has something unique to offer. Humans have creativity, adaptability, passion. Your emotions are incredibly strong compared to other species we've encountered. You feel everything so intensely: love, anger, joy, fear. It's remarkable. You make it sound like your people don't feel emotions. We do, but differently, calmer, more controlled. We had to learn emotional regulation to survive our transition period. But we lost something in the process." She smiled sadly. "We lost the ability to feel wonder the way humans do. Everything is logical, measured, planned. We envy your capacity for surprise and spontaneous joy." Jake tried to imagine a world without wonder, without the thrill of discovering something new. "That sounds lonely." "It is. That's part of why I volunteered for this assignment. Being around humans, seeing how you experience life, it reminds me of what we used to be like." "Is that why you keep coming back here? To feel less lonely?" She nodded slowly. "Partly. But also because you're unusual, Jake. Most humans who learn the truth about us either panic or try to exploit the situation somehow. They want proof, evidence they can share with others. They want to become famous or rich or powerful. And I just want to understand. Yes. You listen without judging. You accept without trying to control. It's rare. Jake got up to refill her coffee, thinking about what she'd said. Can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you have a name? I mean, what do your people call you? She paused, like she was deciding whether to trust him with the information. My designation in your language would be something like observer of behavioral patterns. Third assignment, desert region. But when we interact with humans, we choose simpler names. You can call me Zara. Zara. That's nice. Jake sat back down. How many of your people are here on Earth? Not many. Perhaps 30 or 40 scattered across the planet. We try to stay unnoticed. Blend in as much as possible. Most of us work night shifts like this, or in isolated areas where we won't encounter too many people. What happens when your research is done? Zara's expression grew troubled. We report back to the council. They'll review all our data and decide whether humans are ready for official contact. And if they decide we're not ready, then we leave and wait. Check back in another century or two to see if things have improved. Jake felt a chill. And if things have gotten worse, then we add Earth to the memorial database, another world that had potential but couldn't overcome its divisions. The idea of humanity being nothing more than a failed entry in some cosmic database made Jake's stomach turn. Is there anything we can do to influence that decision? Keep being who you are, Zara said simply. Show that humans are capable of accepting differences, of choosing curiosity over fear. Every positive interaction I have gets recorded, every example of human kindness, cooperation, and wisdom goes into the report. No pressure, Jake said with a weak smile. The pressure isn't on individuals like you, Zara replied. It's on your species as a whole. We're looking for large-scale patterns. Are humans becoming more cooperative or more divided? Are you solving your environmental problems or making them worse? Are you choosing leaders who unite you or ones who divide you? And right now, how are we doing? Zara looked out at the desert, where the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the eastern sky. It's mixed. We see incredible examples of human cooperation. Your scientists working together across borders, your young people organizing to protect the environment, ordinary people helping each other during disasters. But we also see increasing polarization, resource conflicts, and environmental damage. So we're right on the edge. Yes, the next few decades will determine everything. Jake felt the enormity of it all settling on his shoulders, the fate of humanity being decided by beings from another world, based on whether his species could learn to work together instead of fighting all the time. This is a lot to process, he said finally. I know, I probably shouldn't have told you so much. Zara stood up, leaving her usual tip. But you asked honest questions and listened to honest answers. That gives me hope. Will you keep coming back for as long as I can? My assignment here lasts another few months after that. She shrugged. We'll see what the council decides. As she walked toward the door, Jake called after her. Zara. She turned back. For what it's worth, I think your people should give us a chance. Humans mess up a lot, but we're also capable of amazing things when we put our minds to it. She smiled, and this time it reached her strange, beautiful eyes. That's exactly the kind of thing I'll be putting in my report. After she left, Jake stood at the window watching the sun rise over the desert, thinking about second chances and the weight of hope in a universe full of failed worlds. 3 more weeks passed, and Zara's visits became the thing Jake looked forward to most. She came every few nights, always at the same time, always with new questions about human behavior, and always with fascinating answers about her world there. Conversations had become deeper, more personal. Tonight felt different, though. Jake could sense it the moment she walked in. Her usual calm confidence seemed shaken. Her silver hair looked duller somehow, and those strange eyes that normally sparkled with curiosity now seemed worried. Everything okay? Jake asked as he poured her coffee. My time here is ending soon. She said quietly, the council has called our team back for evaluation. Jake felt his stomach drop. He'd gotten used to these late-night conversations, to having someone who understood him in a way nobody else ever had. How soon? 2 weeks, maybe less. She stared into her coffee cup like it held answers to questions she didn't want to ask. I'll need to file my final report soon. And what will that report say? Zara sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of worlds. That humanity is complicated. More complicated than we expected. Jake sat down across from her, sensing this might be one of their last real conversations. Complicated how? We came here expecting to find a species like the others we've studied. Clear patterns, predictable behaviors, simple classifications. But humans don't fit any of our models. She looked up at him. Take you, for example. By all our measurements, you should be terrified of me. Your species has deep instincts about recognizing threats, avoiding the unknown, protecting yourselves from anything different. But I'm not scared, exactly, and you're not the only one. In my travels, I've met humans who showed incredible kindness to strangers, who risked their own safety to help others, who chose love over fear even when fear would have been the logical choice. She paused, but I've also seen the opposite. Humans who choose hatred over understanding, who destroy rather than build, who let fear control every decision. Jake nodded. We're not all the same. Some people are good. Some are bad. Most are somewhere in between depending on the day. That's what makes this so difficult. Other species we've studied had clear dominant traits. The Villani were naturally cooperative. The Thros were inherently aggressive. But humans, she shook her head. You have the capacity for both incredible, good and terrible evil, sometimes within the same individual. What does that mean for the Council's decision? I don't know. Some of my colleagues think humanity is too dangerous, too unpredictable. They point to your wars, your environmental destruction, your willingness to hurt each other over resources or beliefs. Zara's voice grew sad. Others think you have potential, that your creativity and passion could contribute something valuable to the galactic community. Jake felt the weight of billions of lives hanging in the balance. Which side are you on? I'm on the side of hope, she said simply. But hope isn't always enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Jake watched Zara's face in the fluorescent light, memorizing every detail. Her pale skin that seemed to glow softly, her silver hair that moved like liquid mercury. Those impossibly large eyes that had seen wonders he couldn't imagine. Can I ask you something? Jake said finally. Of course, if the Council decides against contact. Will we ever see your people again? Eventually, yes. We check on developing species every few centuries. If humanity survives its current challenges and grows more unified, we might reconsider contact in the future. And if we don't survive, Zara didn't answer directly, but the sadness in her expression said everything. I wish there was something I could do, Jake said. Some way to help tip the scales. You already have, Zara replied. Every conversation we've had, every moment of acceptance you've shown, it all goes into my report. You've proven that humans are capable of looking at the unknown and choosing curiosity over fear. One person out of billions isn't much of a sample size. It's enough to show potential. And you're not the only one. There are others like you, Jake, people who choose understanding over hatred, who help instead of harm, who build bridges instead of walls. She smiled slightly. The question is whether there are enough of you to change the overall pattern. Jake leaned forward. What would it take? What would your people need to see to believe humanity is ready? Large-scale cooperation on global problems, evidence that humans can work together across cultural and national boundaries. Progress on environmental restoration. Leaders who unite rather than divide. She paused. Most importantly, a significant reduction in violence and conflict. Worldwide. That's a tall order. It is, but not impossible. My people went through the same transition centuries ago. We had our dark period, our wars, our environmental disasters. The difference is we had more time to figure it out. How much time do we have, based on our projections? Maybe 50 years before the environmental damage becomes irreversible. Maybe less before resource conflicts escalate into global war. Zara's expression grew grim. Your species is approaching the same crisis point that destroyed dozens of other civilizations. The enormity of it all was overwhelming. Jake rubbed his temples. trying to process the idea that humanity was racing against time to prove it deserved to survive. I have something to tell you, Zara said suddenly. Something I probably shouldn't share, but I want you to understand how important this moment is. What is it? The council isn't just deciding about contact. They're deciding about intervention. She looked directly into his eyes. If they determine that humanity poses a threat to other worlds, they have the authority to take action. Jake felt ice in his veins. What kind of action? The kind that ensures Earth never develops the technology to reach other worlds. The implication was clear and terrifying. They would stop us from advancing, or worse. Zara's voice was barely a whisper. It's only happened twice in recorded history, but the option exists. Jake stared at her, understanding dawning like a horrible sunrise. That's why you're really here. You're not just studying us for potential contact, you're deciding whether we live or die. I'm deciding whether you get the chance to prove yourselves, Zara corrected. There's a difference, is there? Before Zara could answer, she suddenly reached across the table and grabbed Jake's wrist. Her touch sent that familiar electric sensation through his arm. But this time it was stronger, more intense. He could feel something flowing between them, like she was sharing not just physical contact but something deeper. Looking directly into his eyes with an expression of desperate hope, she whispered, "Why aren't you terrified of me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning far beyond the simple words. Jake realized she wasn't just asking about fear. She was asking about acceptance, about trust, about whether two completely different species could look at each other and see not threats, but possibilities. Her touch on his wrist felt warm, almost burning, and in that moment Jake understood that this was more than just a casual question. This was the test. Everything had been leading to this moment, this choice between fear and faith. Jake looked into those strange, beautiful eyes that held the wisdom of another world and the weight of his species' future. He felt the electric connection between them, the bridge between two completely different forms of life. And he knew his answer would change everything. Jake looked down at Zara's hand wrapped around his wrist, feeling that strange electric connection flowing between them. Her question echoed in his mind. Why aren't you terrified of me? He could see the desperate hope in her eyes, the weight of countless worlds hanging on his answer. Because, he said quietly, meeting her gaze without flinching, terror's for the unknown. You're not unknown to me anymore. You're just Zara. Something shifted in her expression. The tension in her shoulders relaxed, and for a moment, she looked almost human, almost fragile. Just Zara, she repeated softly, as if testing how the words sounded. Yeah? You're my friend who comes in for coffee and asks interesting questions. You're curious about everything, you're kind to people, and you leave great tips. Jake smiled. The fact that you're from another planet doesn't change any of that. Zara released his wrist but didn't pull her hand away entirely. In all my years of studying humans, no one has ever said anything like that to me. Maybe you were studying the wrong humans, or maybe I found the right one. She smiled. And it was like watching starlight. Jake, what you just said, the way you just reacted, it's exactly what gives me hope for your species. One person's opinion won't change the council's mind. It might. Zara pulled out her recording device. This entire conversation has been documented. Your responses, your acceptance, your complete lack of fear or aggression when faced with something that should terrify you. It's proof that humans are capable of growth, of choosing understanding over fear. Jake looked at the device with its strange, shifting symbols. So I'm going into the official record, you are, along with dozens of other positive interactions I've had. The old woman who invited me for dinner when she found me lost. The child who shared his lunch with me in the park. The mechanic who fixed my equipment for free just because he wanted to help. Zara's eyes brightened. Humans who chose kindness when they could have chosen fear. And the bad interactions? Those two. The man who tried to attack me when he sensed I was different. The group that followed me because they thought I was a threat. The official who wanted to capture me for study. She sighed. Both sides will be in my report. Which side wins? That's not my decision to make. I just present the data. But Jake, she leaned forward. What happened here tonight? Your response to my question. It's the strongest evidence I have that humans are ready for contact. They sat together in the quiet diner as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Jake knew this was probably goodbye, but he wasn't sad. Instead, he felt honored to have been part of something bigger than himself. What happens now? He asked. I return to my ship tomorrow night. We'll travel back to the council world, and all the observers will present their findings. The decision could take months, maybe years. And then, if the council approves contact, your world will receive an official message. Nothing dramatic, probably just radio signals that your scientists can decode. First contact will be gradual, careful, and if they don't approve? Zara didn't answer directly. Then we wait and hope humanity finds its own way forward. As the first customers of the morning shift began arriving, Zara stood to leave. But instead of her usual goodbye, she did something unexpected. She hugged Jake. The contact sent waves of that electric sensation through his entire body, but this time it felt different, warmer, like a gift being passed from one friend to another. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing a person instead of a monster, for choosing curiosity over fear, for giving me hope. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. She pulled back, and Jake saw tears in those strange, beautiful eyes. If we meet again, it will be under very different circumstances. I hope we do. So do I. And then she was gone, walking out into the morning light and disappearing around the corner of the building. Jake never saw her again, but her impact on his life was just beginning. 6 months later, Jake quit his job at the diner, not because he was running away from the experience, but because it had given him purpose. He started volunteering at the local community center, helping people who were struggling. He began speaking at schools about acceptance and understanding differences. He never told anyone about Zara directly. How could he? Who would believe such a story? Instead, he focused on the message she'd given him, that fear of the unknown was a choice, and humans could choose differently. Jake started a blog called Choosing Wonder Over Fear. He wrote about small acts of kindness he witnessed, about people who helped strangers, about communities coming together to solve problems. The blog grew slowly but steadily, attracting readers who were hungry for positive stories about humanity. Within a year, Jake had connected with similar writers and activists around the world. They formed an informal network of people dedicated to highlighting the best of human nature, not ignoring the problems, but focusing on solutions and the people working to implement them. Sometimes, on clear desert nights, Jake would step outside and look up at the stars. He wondered if Zara was out there somewhere, still watching, still hoping. He wondered if the council had made their decision, and whether his words that night had made any difference. 3 years after their last meeting, Jake received an email that made his heart race. It was from a radio astronomy lab announcing they detected structured signals from space. Nothing dramatic, just mathematical sequences that suggested intelligent origin. The kind of first contact Zara had described. Jake stared at the announcement for a long time, remembering a pale woman with silver hair who had asked him why he wasn't terrified. He thought about his answer, about the choice between fear and wonder, about the bridge that could exist between two very different kinds of life. He opened a new blog post and began typing, "Today, humanity received its first confirmed message from another world. As we stand on the threshold of the greatest discovery in our history, we have a choice to make. We can respond with fear, with suspicion, with the assumption that anything different must be dangerous, or we can respond with curiosity, with hope, with the understanding that differences might be gifts rather than threats." The post went viral within hours. It was shared millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, quoted by world leaders and scientists. But Jake's favorite response came from a young girl who wrote, "My teacher says aliens are scary, but you make them sound like friends we haven't met yet. Friends we haven't met yet." Jake smiled, thinking Zara would like that description. Years passed. The signals from space continued, gradually becoming more complex. Humanity began to work together in ways it never had before, united by the knowledge that we weren't alone. Environmental cooperation increased. Wars decreased. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't fast, but it was progress. Jake kept writing, kept speaking, kept spreading the message that wonder was stronger than fear. He never knew if his words that night in the diner had influenced the council's decision, but he liked to think they had played a small part. Sometimes he imagined Zara reading his blog from whatever distant world she called home, smiling at how one human's choice to see friendship instead of threat had rippled outward, to touch millions of lives. In his desk drawer, Jake kept a small notebook where he'd written down her final question. And his answer, on quiet nights, he would read it and remember that moment when an alien woman grabbed his wrist and asked why he wasn't terrified. The answer had changed everything, not just for him, but for the world. Because in the end, the greatest discovery wasn't that we weren't alone in the universe. It was that we could choose to greet the unknown with open hearts instead of closed fists. And that choice had made all the difference.